this. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to rumble?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Motorroading Live's The Build Show. Tonight, we're going to get our hands dirty with ballast, with stones, rocks, and we're going to do it a bit of the dirty way, at least from my approach. We'll talk more about some of those techniques. Ralph's here to talk to us about some of the techniques he's got, showcase some of the spectacular work, especially some of the spectacular weathering work he's done on his. Lloyd should be joining us shortly. As a lot of you guys who have met on the nightly shows, and we've probably talked about it at least somewhat briefly on some of the Thursday shows, as we've talked about ballast, I produce or make my own ballast from leveling sand. It's decomposed granite, and you can buy a 40-pound sack, maybe a 25-pound sack of the stuff for $8 or something. It's the stuff in the Monty Garden Center, a home improvement store that is intended for leveling garden pavers or yard pavers, the stones for a pathway. Comes in a wide range of sizes. Looks like gravel of a wide mixed grade. This is some of it out of a bag. I've been working on the same bag for 3 or 4 years with what I have ballasted. It's going to go a long way. Like I said, there's a lot of these pieces you can't use, but I do break a lot of this stuff up in a coffee grinder, of course, dedicated for scenery purpose coffee grinder. But it's a wide range of stuff. We're going to break this stuff down, change the color of it, and then we'll talk about some of the various adhesive techniques that people have used, other than possibly the most common PVA or white glue or diluted white glue techniques. From matte mediums and other wet techniques to the technique that I've fallen in love with, which is a dry technique of applying ballast. So let's break some down. Ralph, what do you think about mediums or the ballast stones? Are you using a commercial product?
No. We have a lot of construction goes on around here, so there's a lot of concrete that gets taken out of construction sites and gets taken to these areas where they have these, what do they call them? The vibration machines that'll break it down to get the rebar out of the concrete. And then they use the chipped up concrete as screening when they're doing roadways.
Sure, still.
So the last time somebody was doing a roadway around here, I went and got 2 5-gallon pails of the stuff and I sifted it. So I ended up, I don't know if you can see how fine that grain is.
Yeah, quite a bit of it.
So that's what I use, and it's the right color as far as I'm concerned. And the other thing that comes out of it is pieces like that I use in my river scenes.
Yeah, what do they call that? What's Woodland Scenic sells that?
Talus.
Yeah,
talus.
Small sack for a few bucks.
So I've got about 3 or 4 different sizes of screened material. The smallest one I've got, I could probably go smaller by using a nylon stocking, but I figured this is good enough.
Yep.
And it works well. The color's right, as far as I'm concerned. I don't have to add any more color to it except for when I'm weathering the rails. And you get the rust off the steel and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And I do color by it, but your adhesive is just about always going to change the color. That's something that's often spoken real fondly of some materials. I've seen people use an Arizona Rock and Mineral or Scenic Express or Woody's products, Woodland Scenic's products. And one of the greatest acclaims you'll hear from other YouTubers talking about this is that the adhesive does not change the color properties of it. It doesn't darken it. It's not as much of a big concern if you're dealing with cinder, which is something we'll briefly discuss as well. Hey, Tim, welcome in. So we're just getting started anyway, too. So we'll talk about some of the techniques. So what products are you using, Tim, since you're jumping in?
Woodland Scenics is one of the products I've used. I've used the medium ballast on this. That's what's sitting over here.
And sizes for that we debated that fiercely several years ago in this community. I mean, to the point that, you know, Jimmy gave us homework to go out and steal a couple stones of ballast off the local, borrow a couple of stones of ballast off the local line if you could, and you know, we mic'd or you know, measured them and mic'd ballast stones to try to find what was scale appropriate. And I can tell you what is scale appropriate, but it doesn't look right to my eye. So, you know, while I'm all for prototypical and scale, fine scale and two scale proportions, if it doesn't look right, if there's a theatrical element to what we're doing. Our eyes are still 1-to-1, and not everything scales appropriately. So my ballast is slightly oversized on purpose, and I'll show you what scale looks like when I pour out a few samples in a moment of what I'm going to produce. The scale, I love it loose by itself, but when you put it on the line, you lose the particulate nature of it. It doesn't look as much like individual stones.
Well, one thing I like about the medium is it's multiple colors. It's not just they've changed their ballast in recent years. It's no longer like the walnut shells where
Yes,
they're all square chunks. These are actual random size and random breaks or whatever it is they're making it out of now.
Right. And I don't care about the actual medium. You know, I mean, the fact that this is decomposed graded is a neat conversation piece to say that I'm using the exact same thing the prototype's using. Ralph is in his case too. It's effectively a limestone, a processed limestone since it's broken down concrete, but it's a natural product, exactly what is on the prototype. That's a nice conversation piece, but in the real world, I don't care.
My problem with ballast in the past was that Woodland Scenics, what they make for HO, to me, is the wrong scale. The ballast that they make for N scale works best for HO.
It does. Well, and it's probably scale appropriate in N scale. I do like and I like a slight variance in size, but if you use like the fine and the medium together, it's a little drastic for my taste. Maybe maybe
They don't label them in scale anymore. They have fine, medium, and coarse.
Right.
Is how they label them now. They don't label them like they used to. Like you had your N scale ballast, your HO scale ballast, your O scale ballast. Now it's fine, medium, and coarse.
Well, there's differences and different prototypical situations for needing different courses. But what should be appropriate is probably about kind of between the two. What's actual proper to scale is probably between the fine and medium. But what looks right to my eye, anyway, is about the sizes that you have there. Those sizes look correct. I can tell that it is particulate, that they're individual stones. They have character, and it casts some shadow.
And then I've also used in the past, I know you think this is a little weird, crushed up clay kitty litter.
Yeah, we talked about that once. That made me a little nervous for a couple of reasons. I'm not exactly sure why. I can't put my finger on it. I mean, you've got to be really cautious with using kitchen products like staining with tea or staining with coffee is fine. You can't use coffee grounds or anything like that. This stuff's going to break down on the land. It's not going to last. So you don't want to typically use food, you know.
And I mixed it with some gray. Well, there's gray stuff black stuff that I had found.
Yeah, I remember seeing this.
There's the kitty litter.
And it looked pretty good. It really does. Little weathering or something. Honestly, the particulates are not bad.
And that was the cheap generic kitty litter. And like I said, I found some black.
Just don't get the clumping stuff.
Yeah, don't get. Yeah,
as soon as you wet it, it goes into a ball. So.
Yeah.
This is just the cheap gray clay kitty litter. Crushed it up. And mixed it with some black stones and crushed them up that my wife had found at Michael's. And that's how I got the stuff that looked like the cinders scattered through it.
See, and now the two color stones, to me, in my opinion, if it's two color, you're probably doing steam era, because when I see ballast around here now, it's one color. If it's got any other color in it, it's because of the rust of the rails or oils dripping down from a locomotive or something like that. But it's one color, not two. And two colors to me just doesn't look right.
Well,
Even in steam era.
That all depends on your location too. I mean, you got locations where they use pink ladies. They actually have both here in town in Evansville. There's one line that they have pink lady on, and there's the other lines where it's crushed granite. And granite you can get comes in multiple colors when they crush it.
Oh, absolutely. There's a wide range of colors of ballast. And that, I mean, we've mentioned on just about every show reference photos, because that is one of the, if there's anything you do, period, if you're trying to attain anything approximating photorealism, or even forget that. If you really care about the fidelity at all, doing it to a photo is an absolute critical requirement. And and the geography really defines that. So for the guys who really are trying to be as freelance as possible and making it up, you need to have at least, in my opinion, my instinct is to have some geographic idea of where you want to be, because there's so much variance as you go from one side of the country to the other. It just looks massively different in subtle color variations. And then you will see lines that have different colors. So I've used three or four different colors on mine. So there's two railroads. One is slightly darker, one is slightly lighter, because the Clinchfield serviced multiple quarries and they use the stone they can get the cheapest, because that's exactly what color of stone is going to be on the line. Whatever the Norfolk Southern or the CSX or the Union Pacific can buy the cheapest, that's what's going to be there for the most part.
And it's whatever's going to cost them less to get it to the location where they need it too. If it's a local quarry and it's not going to cost them very much to get it there, and it's cheaper than what anybody else is, and it's all about money.
Absolutely. And then you have a couple variances, and especially the only other case where I think the two color situation really comes into play is what Ralph was alluding to slightly, that is so prevalent in the steam era that the EPA just would not have any of today. Not to mention we don't have cinder like we did then. Is that they use cinder for overgrowth coverage. So on the sides of the line they have cinder ballast or cinder stone to keep the growth down. I've emulated that on mine, and when we work on some samples in a moment, you'll see it. I've already put the cinder down.
So there's what I'm talking about. That's
a good shot.
I can't seem to get my tablet working over on the other side of the layout to show you in real life. So this is a photograph I have.
The particular size is great, and you weather probably pretty similar. I probably take a lot of it from your weathering anyway, but you weather a lot the same way I do as well. And that's one thing I think a lot of people miss, and we probably get maybe a little more deeper into weathering toward the end of this, but is that they don't recreate the color variations that happen sometimes in the center of the rail, but that the rail is degrading and flaking rust off into the ballast. And that spreads depending on how recent the ballast was applied or refreshed.
And it's not necessarily the flaking that it is; it's the iron oxide that washes off.
Yeah. All right, that makes sense.
It just washes off with the rain. That's what stains your rock.
Yeah, it's particulates of it, but you see those very prevalently on ballast that's not very, very recent. If it's been there for any period of time, you see that a lot. I've seen it modeled, of course, and where I get a lot of the inspiration for my modeling period is from Mike Conflone's modeling, and he recreates that, and I love the way he gets that using powders that, as the last thing you do, because you can't do anything. Once you put powders down, anything you do is going to disturb the powders. So
that's right. So this is my gauntlet track area, and I ballasted this first before I did anything else, because I wanted to make sure that everything was set in place. I didn't want it to move after I put the two rails together.
You see, I see callus mixed into that too.
You see
Or
what?
would be considered-
Yeah,
what would
well,
be considered talus
Oh,
side?
a little bit of talus up by the wall. Yes.
Yeah, riprap. But see, that's another thing.
That's
Depending on where
that's
you're at
only
well, you may have some riprap in with your ballast.
well,
that's only because of the area. This is what's above it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's the surrounding scenery, and that there's a big debate. Another one of the great debates of the hobby is wind to ballast. Miles has referenced Gil Freitag, fairly famous. On Motor Railroad Hobbyist Forum, there was a recent article about the 10 most iconic. I think iconic was the word they used. Motor railroaders throughout all of motor railroading. The John Allens and Lynn Westcott, a few of those other guys that were listed in that group. And Gil Freitag either made that top 10 or was referenced a whole lot of times as a reference. But Miles has said before that Gil Freitag says, get the track running well, test it. And when everything's running right, ballast it and ballast it all because it locks everything in permanently. And
it does.
And I'm a believer in that. And when I used to head lay track, I used to ballast between the tie and before I laid the rails. I can't do that these days because of the detail parts that I use. I can't sand my ties flat. I have to depend on being able to pick some of the ties up and float them and expect the ballast to make that rigid as it sets. But if it wasn't for that, I would put ties down and ballast and then put rail on top. Everything would be.
Yeah. So when I lay my ballast, like Lloyd was talking last night, I use a spoon. I put it down the middle and I run my finger just back and forth, or a brush. I don't usually take it above the ties, but you have to make sure there's no way in hell that you can. Doesn't matter how you do it, you're going to have some little granules that are going to stick either on top of the tie or in the web of the rail, and you have to be really meticulous and go back and get those things out of there.
With that
You
question,
gotta go back and pick them out.
And once that's done, like I glue my track down. I use that refrigeration tape, the insulating tape, for my roadbed instead of cork or any of that stuff. I glue my track to that with no more nails, and I use spikes in the middle of the rail just to hold it in place, and the spikes come out after it's ballasted, and the glue is all set for the ballast.
I do really like that material. That is, I tried that stuff recently too on Ralph's suggestion or on his discussion about that. It comes in a 2-inch wide strip for plumbing insulation, piping insulation. It comes in a 2-inch wide strip, has a self-adhesive back on it so you can peel it off and set it. I don't use it on head lay track for fairly obvious reasons, but I've used it in all of my staging so far, and I'm sold. I run trains a bit in the staging as I laid the track down initially, and then I ran trains immediately afterwards on top of this stuff, and it's spectacularly sound bending. I'm not sure that I would say it's as sound bending as, a 1/2 inch of homostone, but it's also that. So, but it's really close. And in most cases, especially with sound equipped locomotive stuff, I'm sure this is entirely adequate. And it's much better. And I'm not a cork fan. By all means, if you're using cork, anything that we're going to talk about tonight applies to cork. Actually, I think the dry adhesive ballast technique probably would be a great benefit to those who use cork. Speaking of that, let's talk about a couple. I can show while we talk about this. One little thing I wanted to mention, I brought some of this in here just to kind of mention it. I think in certain unique cases, this might actually be valuable. So I found this stuff. It comes in much larger stones. It's called perlite. I used it for making the talus in a river section across my peninsula. And as opposed to much larger stones of this that would add up in weight, especially the river's 7-8 feet long with talus along both sides. I was afraid this was going to add up substantial weight on top of a 1/4 inch plus of resin and everything else on styrofoam. This stuff is so incredibly light that actually the hard thing is to keep it from flying around. It has the property of sawing up styrofoam, actually.
Well, I think it's a combination of many things, and mica is one of them.
Right, that would be decent too. And I've got this ground. I run this through a coffee grinder and then screened it. And I screened it out. And it's roughly the size that I would want for ballast. And I'm interested in trying it. If you were trying to do something spectacularly light, this would absolutely help that. And it takes color really well with wet colors, especially with this stuff.
The problem you're going to have with being very light is that as soon as you add your liquid to it, it's first off, it's going to want to float. Oh,
no question. I think that's the dry.
You have to mist it with an alcohol or a soapy solution.
Right, and I
so that when you add your glue or whatever you're adding, it's not going to create that issue of floating the material all over the place.
That makes sense. I haven't tried using this dry technique, so. And we'll talk about that for a second. So I use this stuff and I break it down. I've got, every time I find a different size screen or colander I buy, this is my favorite combination. This gives me the grout size. It's a soft one too, which I actually rather like. Initially I didn't think I would, but I actually rather like it. I use that and I use this combination. This protects the soft one, lets me throw larger stones in, and this, the combination of these sifts out the small stuff that I don't want for sure, and the larger stuff that I don't want. It gives me the size I want between. So I can do a one-step process basically to screen out exactly what I want, and then dump it over. I may mute in a minute while the guys are talking and screen some of this out, but it's a bit noisier. I can be a bit noisy. And then I used two things added to it. So I use unsanded grout. I don't have a whole lot of my containers here, but we'll mix. I've got enough to mix them up. So unsanded grout in white, just a pure white, because this is already too dark for my application. The unsanded grout will stick to this material surprisingly well, and it will lighten it. However, how much lighter you want to make it, add more. And you get it almost pure white, although when you do wet it, some of that goes away. So I do make it a little lighter. Now, grout, as I've talked about before, because I'm a big fan of grout in modeling, as it seems a lot of European modelers use grout for dirt and other techniques. I love grout.
Sanded or unsanded?
It depends on the application. So I have some of both. I have some buff that is sanded that I mix with dirt, color of dirt. I'm a big for this is unsanded. The grout is most typically 4 things. Regular grout. It's sand or silica sand, very fine sand. Not that dissimilar from what would be used in sandblasting or something. It's fairly consistent in particulate size, unlike play sand, which by all means you can use play sand for modeling too. You just need to sift it and run a magnet through it, almost assuredly. Same thing with this. You need to run a magnet through this stuff too, just to be safe. I don't get much of anything out of here versus the dirt, which I quite often do get some chunks of stuff out of the dirt with the magnet. But
just a little tip, if you're talking magnets, make sure that you wrap your magnet with a nylon stocking or something.
Yeah, I keep
so that when you run it through the material, the metallic material is not going to actually stick and stay on the magnet. You'll be able to peel it off by taking the cloth off.
And I use a zip top bag turned inside out.
That works too.
Then you can just flip the zip top.
The thing is to cover the magnet.
Absolutely, and that just makes your life so much easier. So grout is typically 4 ingredients: silica sand, Portland cement, which concrete is effectively cement and aggregate. So it's effectively, stones and a cement. Portland cement is just the pure mortar of that. It's the pure hardening components of lime-based hardening components. Portland cement's quite strong, especially what's put in grout's actually quite strong. A dry latex adhesive, that's what this is by itself, and a coloring agent, if it has it. Just about always does. Even a white will have some kind of coloring agent because the colors are not the.
So your latex powder has a dark color to it. Does it stay that way?
It does color it a little bit, and you can get this in a whole lot of different stuff. The first bag of this stuff I bought when I was first playing with this was much lighter in color. This is much more like a mortar color.
Okay.
But it doesn't. I mean, this changes the color quite dramatically. I mixed a few base samples up. If you were doing, and if I was doing in scale, I would use sanded grout, fine sanded grout. That's all I would use, because you could never recreate. You could never get particulate size and not be so grossly oversized. That's. I forget what I used in that. I think that's sanded grout and then colored with more adhesive. So the reason that I add dry adhesive to it is it's in the grout, but by the time that I dilute this process, especially with stone, I lose a lot of the binding power of the latex adhesive, or at least some of it. So I've done it with just grout. It might work. I don't think it's enough on its own. But with the dry adhesive, I've had good luck with it. But here's two sizes. This is
the other plus the adhesive would allow flexibility still.
Absolutely. That's one of the things I love about the latex adhesive is that it's very slightly rubbery. This is the particulate size that it should be accurate if you mic ballast, at least for railroads in my geography around here, it seems. For stones, egg-shaped stones that are 2 to 3 inches, maybe 3 inches a little large. Let's say 1.5 inches to 2.5 inches. This is mic'd correct. I don't dislike that. It's not a bad ballast size. It just loses a lot of its particulate kind of nature, not even at a distance. Yeah, that's the larger one. Okay, this is the finer size. Let's go through that again. All right, this is the finer size. This is the one I lose some of the particulate character to. It's correct prototypically. Yeah, it's correct prototypically. This is my favorite size. It's slightly oversized, but not like 5 inches. It's like 3 inches, 3.5 inches. And you may not even see that much difference on camera about the difference in particulate. Maybe you'll tell more about it when I throw it between some rails in a minute. But this is the stone, which is somewhat darker, and dry adhesive.
And how do you break down your stone?
All right, so we'll go.
Because you can't put the stone in a coffee grinder.
Yeah, I do.
I do.
I don't throw.
You want to destroy it
in a coffee grinder, but I sift out. Stones that are. I'll sift out this stuff, throw it in a coffee grinder, and beat it up. I mean, coffee grinder is $3 or $4, so.
About the size of a coffee bean.
Yeah, that's right. Coffee beans are reasonably hard. This stuff's not horribly hard. I mean, not all of them. Some of them, you can break.
There's a difference between stone and a coffee bean. I don't care what you say.
Oh, no doubt.
What I was saying was they're about coffee bean size stone.
Okay, all right.
They're that really hard.
Big Bill has a question. Okay. Is there a difference between ballast on the main line and in the yard?
Oh, yeah, sure. Of course. Okay, so you're going to have to take into a bunch of considerations when you're to make some decisions about ballasting. The type of railroad that you're modeling, if it's a prototype, then just look at the photos and figure out what they did. If it's a freelance, then there's a bunch of things that are going to come into play. Geography matters. How wealthy the railroad was, how well they maintained their equipment. Even wealthy railroads maintained their stuff really crappy sometimes, and sometimes kind of broke railroads done pretty good jobs of maintaining all their stuff. That's why photos are so incredibly, informative about that. Any yards and sidetracks are definitely going to see less maintenance.
Yep.
And I use a lot of dirt mixed in with my ballast to augment yard and side tracks. And a lot of the yards and side tracks in my era were cinder, just about entirely. You know, they put a little ballast down the center sometimes, if you know, but many of the yards were just poured cinder. But photographically, there's significant differences in everything I look at between yards and main lines.
And usually the main line has more, you say more maintenance done to it, but they actually turn the stones over again and repack them, and they go with those machines. So not the ties, but the ballast ends up a little bit cleaner, a lot cleaner than what you see in a yard or on a branch line. Branch line may see no ballast at all for years.
The yards are probably going to use a smaller stone because there's going to be engineers and rail crews walking around in the yard. Where out on your main line and stuff, it's going to be a larger ballast. Nobody's going to be walking on it. They're not going to be rolling their ankles and stuff.
But
Look at this, Andy.
I had ready on the ready. This is where yard tracks were recently torn out. It was all cinder and dirt. The main line was raised above it. It was quite clear. This one also has there's a small yard back behind it, but I can't get any good photos of it. I had pulled this photo up to talk about drainage. That's drainage is the kind of the name of the game in railroading, or at least when it comes to grade profile. I had a few prototype photos of that. Let's run through a couple pictures while I've got these up of what I've done with some of mine. So I've got I made a few sample boards, and I'll pull those up. We'll pull those out in just a second. Then I'll walk through the process while we talk about some of this. So I made a few sample boards. This one I was trying kind of playing with some of that black foam insulation. Of course, all of these everything I've done here is flex track head laid. Doesn't really change anything that much, but it's a lot of trouble for a short section just as a sampler to do some ballasting on. So they're all that. However, I use the paper mache material that I use in ground goop as the base to build up and change the profiles of the roadbed. And for siding tracks where they're going to be significantly covered or significantly depressed into the dirt, ballast, cinder, or other stone, I cover it in the paper mache and fill in a lot of that gap. So I need a lot less ballast material to, plus I make the slopes, the profiles. So all
the last time you covered that, you mentioned that you covered it with tissue paper.
I've done tissue paper before, but it's basically the same thing. I've made my own ground goop, or I've made my own paper mache before with tissue paper. Ground up in a blender, get it wet, run it through a blender, grind it up in a blender. It's a lot of trouble. I think it would be worth it if you could make a large enough batch. Otherwise, this is just cellular clay. But I fill it in between the rails. I have made my own the equivalent of cellular clay several times. And I like it.
When we covered it earlier, you weren't talking about clay or paper mache or anything like that. You put strips of tracing paper down or tissue paper, and then you just whatever you did on top of it.
Well, and what I've done with the tissue paper was recreating the mud silt spots where it gets muddy between the rails, and that may be a geographic problem that we have here. We get these awful anywhere I've ever rail fed across Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, etc. We get these muddy spots in the ballast where the fine silt floats and rises up in the ballast and makes these mud puddles basically kind of in low ballast piles. To recreate that, and I see that on a lot of sidings, even looking at, and I see it where oil packs into the ballast or the dirt as well. It makes it's so fine of a particulate that it looks like a smooth surface on the top.
Okay, so Bill has another question. He says, what's the purpose of the ballast? Is it for drainage or stability?
For both. Oh, and to hold the rail down, to take the weight, to deal with the vibration, the fact that the rails move around. It's a whole solution. I mean, there are some rail systems that use alternatives to ballast. You know, they're built on, you know, on concrete and such as that. But it's really hard to get it to take the abuse and vibration. Ballast is for 200 years old technology. It's hard to find a replacement for just ballasting the rails above grade. I don't know what you would do to improve much upon that for a rail system, in my mind.
Well, and the ballast is always recyclable.
Yeah, biodegradable. It's basically clean. Don't get me wrong. Cinder is not, you know, exactly, you know, green, but it's popular in its day. I recreated on mine.
I mean, there's machines out there now that they use where it actually recycles the ballast as they're relaying the track.
Yep.
You know, they come in, they pull up all the track, they pull up all the old ties, they load them on a car, and as the machine comes down laying the new ties in, it's actually scooping the ballast up and relaying it down.
But there's another section that I've done on my layout. This is off. Yeah, where I do much of this work at the workbench. So this is a section of where a helper pocket was. I'll show you a larger picture in just a moment of this same scene, but that's raised rail profiles. In my case, this is hand laid here because it's on the layout, and you know, it is just alternating, or I cut a slit in the homosote and flexed the homosote, and then filled the gap in with the celluclay and made a slope. The celluclay, once it's hardened, is effectively the same thing as homosote. Homosote is a paper composite board. I'm using paper mache on top of it. It feels about like the same density to me. And then that gives you an idea of the particulate size. I'm sure I took this picture while it was wet, so I don't know why, but that's the picture I had. So this is what it looks like. Now, granted, this is there's always more work to do. I always, when I look at pictures, see all the stuff I need to do more of, but it is slightly oversized particulate, but I can see the particulate. I can see the coloration. This kind of draws out one point I wanted to make too. When do you guys like to apply? Have you done static grass to rail lines out in the middle, you know, way up against the rails? And if so, when do you apply the grass?
I haven't yet to that point. I'm not on that point of my layout, but I plan on it. And the only spots I'm really going to do that on is like low used siding.
Oh yeah. Well, there's
mainline's not going to have that much grass growing.
What I do, the main line on mine is out here to the side. I mean, this is the Clinchfield main line and a helper pocket for the Clinchfield, and the Norfolk and Western main line here. This is raised. This is raised. The helper pocket is depressed in the center slightly. This is my first grass covering that I put down. I often put down, you know, I put it down in different layers, different sizes, different layers. So there's more I've done since then, but I often put it down first. The larger stuff I put down first. For example, I did
the tall grass.
Right. This
example,
I put down, you know, like the 6 millimeter stuff or something. I put down the tall stuff first. Also, I don't like consistency very well, so I like mixing up. Or, you know, in grass, in the real world, I don't see very many, you know, fields where all the grass, you know, is basically the same height.
It's not uniform.
That's the terminology. Thank you. So I often use a beard trimmer on it and shave at it, but I don't do that first. I put it down because a lot of it gets knocked down by the ballast technique. This is not ballasted at all. I'm gonna start ballasting in a moment, but I put a lot of it down first. You probably, in my case, I overdo it a bit generally because a lot of it gets kind of knocked down or knocked off or damaged in the ballast process. But a lot of the larger groupings of grass have the correct property of coming up through the ballast pile. Now I'll come back and put smaller stuff on top of that.
Yeah. Bill was asking a question, and he asked it of me. Can you use chalk to do the rails? He missed the picture I showed earlier, so I'll do it again. That staining is done with powders. I use paint pigment powders. You can use chalks because there's no chance. I mean, you're not going to rub it off with anything. But I use paint pigment. The only time I'll use chalks is when I'm doing structures. And chalks are like pan pastels, or you buy the chalk sticks and you scrape the powder off. That's basically what that is. But what I use is paint pigment. It's actually put in a liquid to make paint.
Yeah, you could rub it into wood structures, but you know, when it comes like this, when you're dealing with ballast and such, it's going to be a surface treatment. Now, on the sides of the rails, I mean, I paint everything first. All of this stuff's been spray bombed with Rust-Oleum camo stuff that most of us love after the fact. And on all the rails where I've shown you photos of, and in this example picture, this next picture that I have, that's been done. At the moment, all my roadbed sections are still removable, so you can see the gap along the side. I'll fill that in when I'm sure that I'm not going to be getting it here to do electronic work and such.
I've seen guys use that Woodland Scenics rail pen, and that looks so tacky to me. It's the wrong color.
It's the wrong color. It's the wrong application method.
Well,
for me.
Yep, I agree. And what I do first, usually, is before I ballast, is I spray with the Rust-Oleum camouflage paint, or I'll use the Tamiya Brown. The heck's the number? XF9. It's called Hull Red. And then I'll come back and put my rust on it with the powders. And of course, after you ballast, is when you put the powder on.
You guys talk about yourself. The stuff's pretty noisy, so I'll mute for a moment.
Is this one of those smoke 'em if you got 'em type things?
Oh, that's about always.
No comment.
Yeah, that
Can't do that on here.
and
No, I know.
Maybe this is not that annoyingly loud, but generally it is somewhat annoyingly loud. But it doesn't take that much work to break this stuff down. Most of the time I just break it down in somewhat small sections, small increments, because I basically ballast in pretty small increments anyway. But then I get a handful of exactly the correct size ballast for my use case. I like using the two pieces together for that reason. Because that gives me the perfect size out of it.
And so the stuff that went through the flexible screen, where do you use that?
I save it. There's all kinds of uses for it. And a lot of times I'll use it back as a topper for some of this stuff, especially if I'm doing yard tracks where I want them to look somewhat dirty or muddy. I'll use that as a topper for that. I use it as other scenery material. I've used it in a lot of areas along the right of way, like around signal equipment, around the water towers, around interlocking plants, all that stuff. This stuff is some of the best looking stuff in the world for those, kind of grungy areas,
right,
along the right of way. And it packs spectacular.
So I'm gonna back the bus up just a little bit and go back to when you were putting in your high grass. You put it in before you put your ballast. The only thing you have to be careful of when you do that, and it's not that it's a bad thing, but if you're not careful, you're going to knock it all down. So you have to work carefully around it. And some of it, it's okay if it gets knocked down because nothing stands up straight all the time.
Yeah. I overdo the grass a bit, and you're kind of like combing it effectively. I mean, kind of combing it to keep it to come up. A lot of it comes loose, so when you vac it, a lot more dirt or some of the grass comes loose. But it's the only way I can figure out how to truly recreate the effect of the grass coming up through the stones the way it should. especially along the sides of the right of way. I don't generally do like little spots or whatever out in the main line, but I did some through the center here. But a lot of this here, and I expected that I'd do a lot of this with cinder or dirt, not a lot of ballast stone on this siding. So I use a lot more because I want it to look like I want the effect of it popping up through the material.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I was doing small grass that I would do on this much better profiled main line with the cinder right of ways, where you will see a little bit of grass sometimes crop up along the break line, along where the ballast ends and the cinder begins. You kind of see a little grass line there. Yep. At the end of the cinder, you see a little grass line. It's kind of what it seems on the prototype. I'll do that.
In that case, that you have two colors, is the darker color put down first, or is that painted?
No, that's I put the cinder down first on both of these, because there's cinder on everything I do on the sides of the main line. So I put there's a little bit of cinder on that. I put the cinder down first,
and then you put your ballast on top.
Absolutely.
Okay, so at that point you can do your grass and let the ballast come down and sort of knock it a bit.
Absolutely, and I have a lot of times, and I did here. There is cinder along this edge too. There's cinder along, and the grass is kind of right up to the edge of the cinder, because the cinder does a much better job of keeping down the grass than the ballast does. And this is sanded grout, regular sanded grout in charcoal maybe color. I forget exactly. I think it's charcoal, but it's just sanded grout. Now I've used Scenic Express's cinder, I think is who I had, and it's fine, it's no problem. But hobby stores are not that convenient around here. I have to order it, or when I go out of town, I have to buy it or whatever. And grout is like super available. So, all right. Now, I colored it, so I want to show you the difference. And a lot of times I won't do this, and I'll just do it kind of as close to one step as possible. And I'll reclaim the pigment, the dry pigment, pour it back into my pigment container. That's why I have small amounts of pigment in there. Oh, I should have saved some that I didn't color.
Too late. Too late.
Thoughts of mice and me. Let's see if you can tell the difference in the colors very much. And
yeah, there is a slight difference. I see it anyway.
Yeah, and you can keep adding white. Keep adding white. Keep running it. Run it back through. Throw it in there. Mix it around again. Tumble it, or whatever you want to call it, with the pigment. I stir it with a brush. Mix it with a brush or whatever. It'll stick to the sides of it. If you're and what I also done on a small section that I really wanted a real white ballast profile too, like you don't see real bright white ballast in my era, and it's possible that is an effect from photography. I've thought about that somewhat extensively. If that was an effect that was caused predominantly because of photographic properties, but
well, if it's limestone, it's going to be almost white gray.
Yeah, I don't. You just on CSX main lines and on modern main lines, it is bright in color. But if you go back to in my geographic region, if you go back to the 60s or before, I don't find white ballast in my area. So. And then I'll try to mix some adhesive to it. We'll color it. Speaking of chalks and stuff too, I've got a bunch of different colors of chalk, regular ground up chalk, and I've mixed it in to get different colors too. Mm-hmm. And mix it with the adhesive and everything. Put it down with the chalk in it, because chalk's relatively cheap. Actually, I think what I've been doing, what a lot of these are, I forget how I ground these up too. I got a little contraption in there that grinds these up, and I forget what that thing's actually supposed to be used for. These are the chalks you buy for kids to play on a sidewalk with. They're like the size of like not a Sharpie marker, but remember those old school.
About the size of your thumb.
Yeah, Yeah, big fat chalk, and
I know.
they make
My grandkids are playing with them all the time.
it makes the awfulest bunch of powder in the world, and it's very like loose powder or whatever. I don't know how to define that, but it's a much looser kind of character.
So there's the powder that I use. It's AIM powders, and it's sold by Monroe Models now. This container is about $10 when it's up to about there.
Yeah.
And that'll last if you use it on your ballast and so on. I've used this for all my weathering basically, and I still have more than half left.
They don't take that much. I mean, you're running a lot of the rail.
It doesn't, and to do like I've got probably about 300-400 feet of track, and that's all I've used. Now this is compacted down a lot, but this color is called raw umber.
What are these that I like so good?
And that's what I put down around the sides to simulate the rust.
Yeah, rusty brown and new fresh rust.
Is that from Monroe?
Yeah, these I just bought new ones recently because when I first started messing with AIM powders a few years ago, I bought those little about that tall, or they could be like
the sample ones.
Yeah, and it had all the right colors in there. So I've went through like 3 of those little sample, all 4 of them sample packs, because it seems like by the time I'm low on one, yeah, those right there.
I used to be a distributor for AIM, and then when he started to sell them to Athearn, I couldn't compete anymore. But there's 4 containers in here of color, and there's 4 different packs, and you can still get these through Walters. But there's 3 different A, B, and C package, and they all have different colors in them. But altogether, there's probably about 12 or 15 colors. If you buy the large containers, you get the full set. You used to be able to get the full set for $30. And that's a lifetime of material.
Yeah, I do put full strength Mod Podge on the surface, because what I found was happening when I experimented with this, when I was first messing with this dry stuff, because I was curious. I was watching these British modelers, military modeler, European modelers, and military modelers use grout a lot. Of course, I've grouted a few floors, laid a few tile floors, etc. in my life. I had an idea of how it worked. Of course, there's nothing complicated about it, but I didn't really know what the properties of it was. Looked it up online, read a little bit about that, how it would work, what the expectations were. And I started experimenting with it, playing with it. The only problem that I see using the dry material, using the dry latex adhesives basically by themselves, is that they tend to skid on your product. So the only time I've had any problem is if I didn't put glue down first. I can sometimes pull full sheets of the material off from it. Basically a big full strip of like latex paint, effectively.
Well, there's so many different ways of doing things. Some guys have used clear floor polish to lay down ballast. I can't see it because it has a high gloss to it. But they say it works great. And if you ever have to take it up, all you need is some water with ammonia in it, and it's up it comes. It's like using a thinned out white glue, which is basically what I do.
Yeah.
I have, that used to be a full bottle, and that's done in alcohol and water.
Yeah, I've heard that works better. That the future floor, well, it used to be called future floor polish, and it was
now it's Pledge.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Pledge owns the product, but it's a particular type of Pledge, and you were telling us about the details of this once, Ralph, that it's a natural acrylic. It has some benefits for painting, and it was really popular a few years ago in kind of the O-scale 2-rail, Proto 48, whatever groups for some reason. I was seeing a lot of those guys talk about that. Now, I don't worry about it. I just glue profiles, the slopes down, put a little glue on the slope. It also helps you apply it and not run down the slope on you, which I think is...
You need a bigger brush, buddy.
Now, maybe, but I would prefer to be
It just takes you precise and so much longer. You could have had the whole thing done by now.
All right. Well, I'm only going to do that part anyway. This out. We have something to look at. Dumping ballast on and moving it around that's something. If Lloyd still does get to make it tonight, actually, this is my favorite brush for this. If Lloyd does get to make it tonight, he has interesting technique he was kind of talking about experimenting with for applying it with a vacuum. But we may talk about that next on the Thursday show or something that he's been playing with. I find ballasting, for all the talk of quicker techniques for applying ballast, I find ballast a slow process. It's a precise process. I spend a lot of time getting it right. I use my finger as much as any other tool out there. Honestly, these are probably the best tools ever created. So,
With latex gloves on, of course.
Well, I mean, if it's wet or dirty or something, yeah. Well, I mean, I love it.
Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. That's the fun of the whole thing. That's what this hobby's all about, is fun.
I like that. I'm into the fun of it all, but I was never a make mud pies kind of kid. So, I mean, I did like, if there was motors involved or something, I'd spin mud on other people, maybe. But I just find ballasting a fairly slow process. So we're just covered, fairly quick, especially with my head laid track. I'm pretty precise. You can't get every granule perfect, but part of the reason that I love the dry technique is that I can spend the time to basically get it perfect. I'm not talking about excessive amounts of time. It's not, minutes per inch or something like that, like it is for my head laid track. But if I'm going to spend minutes for every inch of track that I lay, then ballasting it appropriately seems important.
Oh, okay. Can you move your Mod Podge just a little bit to the right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I have a question for you. You put this stuff on with a brush. You put your ballast on top. And how do you manage to get the Mod Podge to the top? Where?
So there's dry adhesive on the stones. That was one of the components that I dumped in a moment ago and mixed in.
Okay. Okay. So that means you're going to add more water to it.
Yeah, I am. I'm going to spray it with alcohol.
Just asking. Just asking.
No question. So and that's the best sprayer bottle in the world. It's a fairly fine mist. This is a trick. The little tips that we have to share, the little tricks you find that are great. I've got multiple sprayer bottles that I would fight for to defend, but this is a chloroseptic bottle. You don't want it to spray a real wide swatch. It's meant to spray your tub. So it sprays a fairly narrow swatch, but not as a stream. So, I mean, it's crazy that we become connoisseurs of like spray bottles or something, but this stuff matters. So I bought all kinds of atomizer. Yeah, that'll work. Atomizer, thank you. I bought all kinds of these different
Walmart in the travel section.
Yeah, I bought a few of those because I wanted one that was fairly small. Yeah, I mean, okay, first, you don't have to soak this stuff down. Third, I mean, it needs to get good damp. Does not have to be rigging with water to do its job. Unlike,
so what have you got in the waters? Just straight water?
No, this is 50-50 alcohol water.
Okay.
So if I've run out of 50-50, I buy the cheap 50-50 alcohol too, just for this purpose. I'll keep a thing in around because it's cheaper because you buy it for like.
Well, if you're going to buy 50-50 alcohol, then you don't have to thin it because then it's 25.
I don't thin. If I buy the 50-50, I don't thin it. I just dump it in, and I keep 50-50 alcohol around for dilution stuff, and then for painting, I keep the 91% around. I've got a bunch more bottles of 91 than I do this stuff, 50-50. And if I'm out of it, I use the 91 and throw a little water in it. And I don't worry that much about the mix. It's just, you just need a little alcohol in it to
Because the percentage on the alcohol bottle tells you how much alcohol to water it is.
So
So like in this case, it's, you said 99. So 1% of this is water.
in theory, yeah. Yep. Or other. You want what? Say that again, please.
It's all right. We got it.
Now,
I just use, white glue.
no, nothing against that.
On the bottom.
The only thing I found, I used to do white glue PVA too. The only problem I ever had with white glue PVA is it had a slight sheen to it that annoyed me when I came back to the hobby a few years ago. However, I bottled for many years ago and never noticed it or didn't care or it didn't matter. And that's how I had always done it, was Elmer's and water, and it had worked fine and I had no complaints.
So there's what you get. If you're worried about it, this is almost like a PVA glue. It's a matte polymer medium, matte medium. And you can mix it with water. And when it dries matte.
I have Liquitex matte medium.
Yep, same thing.
And I like that product too. And for doing like dirt. So I do mix grout with a lot of dirt that I use. So that's pre-mixed up. So I sift dirt, regular dirt down and, whatever. And then I mix it with grouts, unsanded grout most of the time of various colors. Actually, you can see a little bit where I threw a little bit of black in there and darkened this up recently. Apparently didn't mix it up as well. But that's part dirt, part grout. And most of the time, buff is my favorite color because it's closest to the dirt. But I have found that the dry adhesive doesn't, if I throw enough in it, it doesn't set right. It doesn't have the same consistency. So I do, now most of the time, just putting down Mod Podge and dusting on top is adequate for sanding it. Sometimes, and it depends on the application, if I'm just putting it down under where static grass is going to go, I'll soak it with alcohol after putting it down to make sure that the Mod Podge rises up. That's not always necessary, or it doesn't make that much difference to do that all the time. But sometimes I'll do that. But if I'm doing a hillside where I really care about the texture of the dirt looking loose and, like it's slipping down the hillside, I'll, paint Mod Podge onto the surface, dust it, going through a screen, basically. This is my grass applicator, but I use a T-strainer effectively the same size as what I put on my applicator. And for some reason, putting it through the T-strainer causes all the part of particulate to separate in a way that maintains a loose, dusty look to it. And I'll apply it that way directly to the glue. If I miss a few patches, I'll paint a little bit of Mod Podge on top of it, do a second coat of dirt if the dirt's going to be massively exposed. And on sidings, I mix dirt in. But I have not had good luck getting the dry adhesive technique and dirt alone to both set up correctly and give me the color that I want. So, and then you do need to vac it. There's times when I need to put a little bit more on too. What I often do, once I've set up, actually pretty much what I always do, after this is set up, after the water has gone off, the Mod Podge is set so that it doesn't sheet off, and the stones are set, I'll use a lot of this leftover stuff, and I'll use that big brush to basically paint it into this surface so it settles down in, using that technique with a spoon of tapping the rails too to make the dust settle into it.
Yeah.
That also, so it does two things. It enforces the color that you want. So if you want a bright white color, use just about entirely unsanded grout, and it'll set up hard as latex if you're using a lot of unsanded grout. If you want to darken that with chalks, you can do that, and if you brush it in and tap it down in and brush the surface pretty good, it's like the reverse of dry brushing. You're brushing it off the surface and causing it to fall down into the grooves between it. You can use a darker color and enforce the darkness that happens with the shadows cast on the stones. and then I'll spray it again. And since that also has that dry latex adhesive in it, and you put that small particulate down in between these particulates, it locks it in, which is effectively the reason that dense grade or multi-grade, multi-size stones, why they lock together so well, because they kind of knock around until they find the best spots to lock in. So it's just about always.
That's what the ballast regulators are used for.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll use dirt. And if I'm doing sidings, I'll mix the dirt or buff colored grout, directly. A lot of times, straight buff colored grout directly into the ballast, especially along the edges. I often do that, so I get a that kind of light brown muddy effect that happens along the edges. I'll use buff. That's a lot of. Okay, that's easy for somebody else to say, but I'll use the buff ballast grout buffed into the sides of it, and then I'll use the white stuff on the surface to kind of enforce the color before I go back and do any weathering or anything. So, and even that, well, some of the stones will come off, but not very many. When that sets up, the vast majority of the stone will stay in place. Not even, I don't know, the vast majority of the stone will stay in place. But they do break loose pretty easy too. Now, we'll cover a couple last things before we go today, and I think we probably should. I think we should spend a show on at some point on weathering track, because that's an excessive subject that in my opinion, you could spend quite a bit of time on. It's not as simple as just powders. There's a lot of things to it. I go through all of my rails with a dental pick. I bit this one a bit. I don't think I can get that to show up. I bent it a little bit so that I could drag it along the rail so it doesn't tear my fish plates out. I bent it. It's bent that way.
Right.
But so I'll drag it along, and these stones that are. So what happens is that the stone sets in the web of the rail for whatever reason. Capillary
because it can. It's testing us.
Phil
Wyman made a good point, Andy. When you're putting your ballast down, he found that once the ballast is down, if you take the handle of the brush, if you're using a brush that you spread it with, and tap the rails. This is what I do too. I apply it with a spoon, and I take the spoon and I tap the rails, and it causes the ballast to fall underneath the rails and down below or beside the ties.
Absolutely. I have done that some on Flex Track. That works really well.
Especially when you're doing in the center of the rails.
Yes. Yeah, it really does. It knocks it off the web of the rails pretty considerably. A spoon is about as good a technique for that as any. It does not work as well on head-laid track. So with my head-laid track, it is largely a brush and pick operation. I will tap a little bit, but a lot of times I can do damage. So
how are you going to do damage? You're tapping the rail, and the ballast is going to fall underneath it, which is where you want it.
It is you just have to be pretty gentle. Like I will tap on.
Well, I'm not hammering the rail with it.
No question.
It's just tapping it, just enough to unsettle the stones, let them fall.
Head-laid track on printed circuit ties, that's no problem whatsoever. If you're spiked quite frequently, that's not much of a problem. If you're laying on contact cement, and it's not bad using the dry method as well. That's also another advantage with mine as well. Soaking the contact cement and wood and the head-laid track that I produce, soaking that stuff in a wet adhesive is not ideal. It's okay. It can be done. I've done it. It works. When I do dirt, it's fine, but it's not
ideal. Dave BNSF N scale. Have any of you experience with Arizona rock or mineral ballasts?
It's my favorite personally. Of the commercial products, it's my favorite.
Okay.
I've got some of theirs around here. They're odd colors. I bought like an Arizona Rock and Minerals ballast set for doing structure roofs, and it was like, you know, those 4 or 5 colors that are, you know, typically on a multicolored stone roof, and fairly small bags. I didn't need a lot of it. I didn't need to buy the individual bags, and it's really good. I don't have any problem with Scenic Express and stuff either. Honestly, what Tim's got there from Woodland Scenics looked pretty decent. I don't care personally much for the Woodland Scenic stuff that we used to get a hold of. That walnut shell stuff, it didn't bother me years ago because I don't know. I don't guess I knew the difference. But once I started seeing it, you know, it's like
You got old.
well, once somebody's talked about something, once you've been shown something, you can't unsee it. So I couldn't unsee the that they're little squares. And every time I looked at
I've
it,
seen that years ago myself, and I didn't like it. But, you know, maybe one reason why I always took rocks out of the driveway when I was a kid, and I took when I smashed them up with a hammer. And I put them in a Ziploc bag, and I'd smash rocks up in the driveway with a hammer until I got them down to about the grain size I want.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. That's true. We went from adolescence to persnickety.
there's a couple of years in between, maybe.
Not very many.
No, probably not. Can't exactly say. I don't remember. I think I was always a bit persnickety. I've always, anything worth doing is worth doing right. I've always been a bit obsessive about doing things. I used to say when all of my buddies were, you know, in high school or college or something, we're learning to play guitar and stuff. And I did a little bit too, but they were all playing guitar. I'm like, well, what are you going to do with it? You want to be a studio musician? Or are you going to go on the road? What are you going to do? No, I just want to learn to play guitar a little bit. I want to tinker. Well, I'm not really a tinkerer. So if I'm going to do something, I get fairly serious about it, or I just don't do it. So my common, I wouldn't call it a philosophy, but what I often say, only half comically, is anything worth doing is worth overdoing. So if I care about something, if I care enough to give it my time, then I'm really going to do it. Because I don't have enough free time. Never have had enough free time, never in my life, because I've always kept myself busy with stuff. Because anything I do takes a lot of time, probably.
See myself, I don't mind getting a few P1 ties.
Yeah.
That's going to see out in the real world. Now, when they're stuck up against the rail, that's where the problem is.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to come off the webs of the rails. That defies physics on the prototype. A few stones on top of the ties, sure. That's on the prototype too. But, I mean, not a lot. But it depends on what, you know, where you're modeling too. I mean, I see it in yards, especially if they've been done recently, and especially if they're somewhat flat yards. You'll see somewhat piles of ballast where they didn't do a very good job of smoothing it out, basically.
Especially in between the rails.
Yes, right. That's what. Yeah, it kind of piles up in between the rails. It kind of has an effect where it's kind of covering multiple ties.
See, now you tap the rails and half of that stuff disappeared.
Sure. Yeah, that works. It works good. It just makes me nervous on my headlight stuff. And I still do it. I just can be a lot. I can be a lot rougher with flex track.
So, what are you saying? Your hand laid stuff is not put together properly?
No, you just can't beat it to death. Okay, here's the trade-off. Here's the trade-off. It's very, very precise at the scale, and I can run scale wheel sets. It has scale flangeways.
Yes.
It's prototypically to scale. That's very fine. Which, if you have high precision, delicacy is just about always a side effect. Now, and then a lot of this offshooter that makes great pack material for sidings and stuff too.
You're right, Phil.
Now, and I'm not saying my way of applying it. That's not the thing I would go into any concerned about, thinking there's that much value in how I apply ballast.
So
It's
the point is, Andy, doesn't matter how you do it.
Yep.
As long as you get the results, there's no right way, there's no wrong way.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. The dry adhesive technique I'm in love with personally. All the rest of it, how you brush it on, how you tap it around, when you do it, what your order of operations is, what works for you. The thing that I think that I would recommend people to give a shot is the dry adhesive. I'm in love with that personal part of the process. That's the one thing I can't see me going back from. Now, I'm all for people showing me other techniques. Well, I mean, for anything, I'm all for learning anything. But I'm all for learning as many techniques as I can for how to apply it in a way that would, especially ways that would speed me up. That sounds awesome. I'm all for that. But, and honestly, the grass actually takes the abuse of brushing it around better than I give it credit for. By the way, this is Woodland Scenic's new grass system grass. I really like it, and I'm not generally a Woody's fan, but I really like their new static grass. It's quite good. It's got like multiple colors and everything you get. I mean, this is just one bag of static grass that's outside of ballast, but
I've got
a color again depends on what season you're modeling.
that's
If you're
right.
modeling spring, you don't have multicolor.
Well, okay.
It's a bright green.
Oh.
Spring.
Depends on when that's why I say you got to get somewhat kind of specific. That's why, people say, are you picking an exact date? No, I don't need an exact date. That's a bit, that's a little bit over the top to pick an exact date.
I've had some guys come back and say, I'm modeling 1954, August 23rd at 10 a.m. in the morning. Now,
Yeah,
to me, that's anal. But
those are not operating.
Andy.
Well, those are not. You can't operate that way. You can't have an operating session in that scheme. You for one, you would not always want it to be the exact same day. There's different operating session flavors depending on days of the week, but that's about railroad operations and such. But you need to pick. There's a month window, give or take. So April, basically 1950, so somewhere in April. That still means there's still a lot of yellow grass that hasn't been, that's tall yellow grass that hasn't been replaced for the previous year.
right.
So you've got green, fresh growth coming up through growth. That's
And that's where I am with my layout.
if you're in
You'll have dead areas where something's got spilled.
yeah, and you still got
And you're buying sprayed with,
and you got trees that haven't filled out. If you're modeling May, everything's basically filled out. So you just
Unless you live in Canada.
But that's why, even if you want to say I'm freelance completely, I run what I like, no problem whatsoever. But there's a few things, you don't have to pick a year necessarily at all, but you just about have to pick a season or a month window.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But like I've said to you with my layout, I can pick vehicles off my layout and replace them and have 1969 one night, have another operating session, do it 1980 the next night, just by changing the vehicles, because the buildings aren't going to change that much. Maybe you have a building that you can take out and put another one in its place, that sort of thing. So you don't have to be pinned down to an exact date. That's the way I feel.
But the season is going to be set by
pretty much just by the colors you use.
That's right. And you can do some unique things like Lloyd has done. I think that's fascinating. It's not for me, but I think it's fascinating. I think it's entirely interesting. Where I come into the problem with seasons is that the railroads operate very differently in the spring, the winter, and the fall. For example, summer is pretty consistent, spring through summer, but they operate differently. At least in Appalachia, they operate differently. So, all right, guys, I know we've run a little bit long tonight anyway. Unfortunately, Lloyd didn't make it tonight, too, because I was really fascinated with his. We'll catch back up and probably do some of that the next time we regather. we may put together a show. We're going to have a couple months off, so this will be our last show going into summer break. We've got some fresh new stuff and some fresh new ideas coming back really strong in modeling season in a couple months into summer. And we may put together a special show or throw together a round table through the next few months as well. So we do have a couple shows coming up. We're going to the RPM show, Runway Prototype Modelers Meet in St. Louis. That's coming up, so look for a few of us there if you're going to be at that show. It's a pretty good show over there. So otherwise, thanks everybody. Tim, of course, jumping in. Ralph, thank you so much. Johnny, as always, for putting up with us long enough. So thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you guys in a couple months.